580,000 pesos. That was all that remained of a lifetime of sacrifice after my son Ricardo signed those documents without my knowledge. I stood frozen in front of the bank computer, my vision blurred and a low ringing drowning every sound. The young bank clerk moved her lips, but I could not make out a single word. All I could see were the numbers on the screen, where my 3.8 million pesos should have been. There were crumbs. The metallic taste of fear flooded my mouth as my hand crushed the bank statement. I recognized Ricardo's signature the same way I taught him to sign his name when he was 8. Now, at 42, he had used it to empty the accounts that represented my old age, my security, the decades I had eaten the bare minimum. I breathed in slowly and wiped the single tear I allowed myself to shed in public. This was not going to end like this. That scene I just told you about did not happen out of nowhere. To understand why it hit me like a blow, you need to know who I am. My name is Cristina Navarro. I live in Mexico City in a small house I paid for, peso by peso, over 35 years. It is a humble house on a narrow street where the light changes with the seasons and the neighbors know who brings tamales on cold mornings. I wake before dawn most days. I keep the kitchen tidy. I fold my clothes the same way I always have. My life has rhythm and small rituals that make me feel safe. I worked as a nurse for most of my life. I took night shifts, morning shifts, double shifts when the bills were tight. I ate quick meals between patients and sometimes nothing at all until the end of the day. I did it because I had 2 children to raise after I was widowed. Young Ricardo was 7 and his sister Mariana was 5. I promised myself then that they would never lack what I could give. I learned to count pennies like prayers. Every coin had a purpose. Tuition fees, uniforms, rent, a little with which to try to breathe. While my colleagues bought new dresses or went out to dinner, I tucked the last few bills into envelopes and labeled them with a sharp pen. For the future, I would tell myself, and that phrase became a small liturgy I repeated before sleep. I kept my household tight and my wishes smaller than I felt. I cannot paint my life as only hardship. There were good things too, small ones that kept me going. The neighborhood grocer who gave me credit on bad weeks. The nurse who covered my shift when I had to rush a child to the dentist. The sound of my daughter Mariana's laughter over the phone when she called from abroad. Those moments were lighted places in an otherwise practical life. My house is modest. 1 living room, a narrow kitchen, 1 bathroom, 2 small bedrooms. I pay attention to where things live. A magnet on the refrigerator holds my little savings notebook, a habit from long ago. Every deposit. Every withdrawal. A tiny ledger of my life. The magnet is a bit rusty now. The page edges of the notebook are softened from years of being opened and closed. That notebook was my altar. I was nicknamed the little ant by my neighbors because I worked and stored like an ant. It was said without malice, and sometimes with a wink of admiration. I accepted the name because I believed saving was dignity. I believed that not being a burden to my children was a duty I owed them and myself. I believed the future required discipline now. When Ricardo and Mariana were growing up, I chose sometimes to go hungry so they could eat well. I sewed school patches on old shirts and read aloud to them at night. I worked 3 hospitals at times, living on a few hours of sleep. I never complained. Complaining would not fill a toothless grin or pay a tuition. Quiet works best when there is no other sound to drown the ache. There were sacrifices I made that were not visible. I once sold a small piece of jewelry to buy a winter coat for Ricardo the day he started a new job. I remember the weight of the coin in my hand, the way the bright gold left a faint ring on my palm. I did not tell anyone. I did not expect recognition. I expected only that my children would have a better path than mine. I am religious in a private way. I keep a small crucifix tucked in a drawer. It is more ritual than doctrine, more a reminder of steady hands than of sermons. I taught my children lessons about honesty, about not taking what is not theirs. I repeated, over and over, that dignity was not for sale. I told them that a family is a circle where each one holds the other up. Those were not empty words for me. For years, I planned quietly for a modest retirement. I wanted neither to be a burden nor to vanish with no trace. My work had given me a roof and, with careful saving, a chance at some peace. It was never about much. A small trip with Mariana, a comfortable chair, perhaps a few pesos to help the grandchildren now and then. Nothing grand. Just a last chapter with soft edges. You might ask why I did not talk more about money with my children. The truth is I did talk little pieces at a time. But there were things you say in passing and things you sign that change when read by someone with a different motive. I trusted. I believed in the lessons I taught. I believed in the son I had raised. That belief is what made the fall so deep. There were hints, yes. Small things that should have been warning lights. Ricardo began visiting more often. He brought fruit sometimes. He asked about my blood pressure. He offered to go with me to the bank, to help with some investments. He told me there were new ways to look after money, that what I had was old-fashioned. He was always so convincing, gentle, impatient for urgency. He knew which buttons to push. When things were odd, I smoothed them over. A misplaced folder. A phone app one had not opened. Must be the bank system, I would tell myself. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt because I have always given people the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe that he was the son I had raised to be honest. I kept quiet, because silence had been the glue of our family for decades. But silence can also be a shelter for wrongs. I remember the morning months before the discovery when I woke and found a door in the house slightly ajar. It was the study door, and I always closed it at night. The light in the hallway made a thin line along the floor. The door being open was a small thing, one of those domestic details your brain files as odd, but not always danger. I stood there for a moment, the kettle boiling in the kitchen, the city's distant hum through the window, and I felt a coldness climb inside me. A door ajar is a tiny image, but it holds a weight. It is a small betrayal of the order you defend. The same way fingerprints on an envelope might be the first sign that someone has been through your papers. I closed the door and told myself to stop worrying. I made tea and sat down to count the pills in the container. The world continued. There is a strange logic in how we excuse the things that hurt us. I excused. I forgave. I pretended not to notice. I stayed silent, but not forgotten. I waited for answers that never came. You may be wondering now, how does a woman who saved her whole life end with almost nothing? The path is not a mystery. It is, in fact, painfully ordinary. People who prey on the vulnerable start with a small intrusion. A suggestion. A demonstration of care. A helpful trip to the bank. They ask for signatures for the most mundane reasons. They name it updating information. They smile with professional patience. And they count on trust. I have spent long hours since that morning writing down the sequence of events. I wrote dates. I lined up receipts. I found emails I did not send and transactions I did not authorize. I found that what was updating information had been a key that opened every lock I had set for myself. The thought of someone who learned their handwriting at my knee using it against me, the son I raised, felt like an ache that had nowhere to land. I called a friend, Helena, who had retired from the hospital and now did legal consulting. I choose, instead, to raise my voice in careful, precise ways. I would organize. I would document. I would not be theatrical. I would be methodical. This is where my story widens from private pain to a plan. The anger made me awake. The plan would make me dangerous in the only way that mattered, prepared. I could no longer stay quiet. For months before the collapse, the rhythms of our Sundays were a kind of quiet music. I would wake early, and the house would smell like coffee and oil. I would fry tortillas and cut onions. The radio in the corner would play songs we had danced to years before. Sundays were ritual. I made chilaquiles the way my mother taught me, careful with the salsa, not too much salt. The children, now adults with their own lives, knew the routine and came when they could. That last, normal, Sunday is seared into me because in its ordinary details the betrayals were already waiting. Ricardo arrived late, as was his habit. The street outside had the dull thud of a truck passing by. The sun leaned in through the curtains and made the table shine. Diana, his wife, sat at the corner of the table with her fingers playing at the rim of her cup. She looked uneasy, like a person about to carry a secret that might crush her. The grandchildren arrived with their small, high-pitched laughter. They ran, they found the bowl of the cookies I had baked the day before, and for a moment the house was all the things I had worked for: noise, life, small chaos that felt like success. I watched them and felt full, but the feeling had a crack in it I couldn't name then. Ricardo, as he poured juice, asked in that casual way that can be rehearsed, "Mom, remember when you said you'd help me with that project?" His voice was soft and practiced. He leaned on the back of a chair like a man who had rehearsed the angle of trust. "Of course, son. What do you need?" I answered, and meant it. I had meant it every time he had come with a request. I had meant to help him get a start. Mother's help. That is what we do. A temporary loan, he said. The house we're building needs finishes. We're a little short. I'll pay you back in 2 months. I promise. He said it like a promise, like a small perfunctory thing you hand someone. He expected gratitude or at most a little worry. He did not expect the ledger at the bottom of my heart to be open and counting. Diana suddenly fixed her gaze on her plate, and I watched how her fingers tightened. She had the look of someone who prays silently for something to be true. I didn't know, then, whether she had been told the truth. She might have believed him. I might have believed him. After all, I had given him money before. I had helped him when the children were small, when rent was hard, when opportunities looked slim. Mothers do not usually keep a ledger of pain. We keep a ledger of what the family needs. I had given him 400,000 pesos 6 months earlier for that same house, or so he said. I had believed in the projects that kept him breathing. When you have fed someone without a receipt for years, it is hard to ask for proof. The limit becomes a soft line. At the edge of the table my savings notebook sat, held by a faded magnet on the fridge. I had been counting every coin for decades. That notebook was a small, honest thing. Ricardo glanced at it as he ate. I saw the movement small, quick. He was calculating in ways I did not understand then. It would tip me into suspicion later. "Mom, you should buy things for yourself," he said at one point with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You save so much. Why hold on to it? Life is for living." His words had a double edge. On the surface, they sounded like concern. Beneath them they suggested inconvenience. He was telling me, softly, that my savings were there to be used by him if I would only loosen my grip. "The life is tomorrow too, son," I replied. My voice had a firmness I hoped would be like a bridge. I said it because I believed it. I said it because I thought a tomorrow for me was a modest expectation, not a wild ambition. I had always thought the future deserved a little reverence. After lunch, the house settled into that domestic hush. The children went to watch a movie. The adults moved to the sofa. The light in the living room became a warm wash. I busied myself with the dishes and the quiet felt like a pause. It is always easier to hide things in pauses. In the weeks that followed that Sunday, Ricardo's visits increased. He started bringing fruit, then small gifts that smelled of a store. He asked more about my health. At dinner he would steer the conversation toward investments, with a casual phrase that made it sound like a modern chore. "Mom, banks are different now. There are smarter ways to grow money." "Your mother is old school," I would say, half joking. I believed in the slow, steady ways more than in the flash of risk. I have seen people in my ward in the hospital fall for the bright and shiny promises. I had seen what happens when haste and hope collide. Curiously, other little things began to show up too. My document folder that I always kept in the bedside drawer would be on the living room table. My phone would have apps open that I did not remember using. Once, a neighbor, Senora Morales, came by to borrow a cup of sugar and lingered longer than she needed. "How are the children?" she asked. She looked at Ricardo with the look neighbors give when a story is half truth and half whisper. Her eyes flicked to me and then away. She is a small woman who gossips with a kindness that can sting. I have known her for years and she has always been blunt. "You look tired, Cristina," she said then, in that way that is really a question. Her voice was ordinary, but her words landed like a pebble in a pool and made rings. I smiled and said I was fine. I said what women say to keep the peace. But it left a residue. Later, when I mentioned the small oddities to a cousin at the mercado, he chuckled and said, "Men can be clever when they need a thing." It was said like a joke, but I felt the heat of embarrassment. The neighborhood knows you, they notice when the pattern of your life tilts. These small scenes are important because they build what I later understood as the arc of trust becoming leverage. Little intrusions. Little white lies. A helpful visit that becomes permission to access a drawer. Can you help me, that becomes a door left open. At one family lunch there was another moment. Mariana called from abroad. We were laughing, the children in the background, when Mariana asked, in that direct way she has, "Mom, can I see the savings list? I want to help you organize things while I'm home." She was blunt and practical, she always was. Her request landed like sunlight through a window because it was the kind of practical help that means action. That was also the afternoon I noticed the way Ricardo's smile tightened when I told Mariana that I kept a small emergency fund accessible only to me and now to her. He looked away before he answered. The room was full of jokes and small complaints about traffic, but there was a thin tension under the table. It felt like a seam ready to split. I had other, quieter signs. A delivery note with an address I did not recognize. A car parked for a few days near the block that I would later learn was registered under a name I had never heard. Things that seemed unconnected when they happened stacked like small boxes in a hallway until you can no longer ignore the pile. I did not want to be the mother who accused her son without proof. The inner argument is brutal. You recall his childhood, the skin knees you kissed, the times you sat with him practicing schoolwork, the days you worked double shifts so he could have a chance. The voice of love argues for explanation, for the better reading. You prefer the thought that the awkward notes are a mistake. So I lived in this in-between for a while, the ordinary domestic scenes, the small kindnesses, the hints of unease. I kept making dinner. I kept folding clothes. I kept saying small prayers that this would pass. I maintained the ritual because it steadied my hands. The domestic sounds remained, but they carried a new tension and undercurrent I could not ignore. My life, which had once been a slow song of duty and love, was now dotted with harsh, interrupted notes. I would have to learn how to turn them into something purposeful. I would have to become someone who could hold a file with steady hands and speak with authority. When I left the bank that day, the city air hit me like a confession. I had to walk toward a doorway I had kept closed for years. It was time to open it. The small things multiplied quietly, like hairline cracks in a wall you only see when you stand very close. He came more often, with fruit in a paper bag or a polite voice that asked about my blood pressure. He offered to help with banks and accounts, as if help were an everyday chore I could accept without question. I noticed a folder out of place on the living room table, my folder when I had closed it in the bedside drawer the night before. My phone would show apps open that I did not remember opening. Once, a utility bill had been paid the same day it arrived, but I had not pressed send. Small errors, each explainable. Together they felt like a pattern. I stayed silent, but not forgotten. At the market, Senora Morales held her bag of oranges and looked at me with the kind of sympathy that stings. "Your son is generous," she said, and then lowered her voice as if it were a secret weapon. "He visits often. He helps out." The words were soft, but the look that followed tightened around my throat. Ricardo's visits took on a rhythm. He arrived at odd hours, sometimes for coffee, sometimes to check on the house. He would ask about my medicines and then, in the same breath, steer the conversation toward new financial tools, apps, transfers, modern banking conveniences. His hand brushed the edge of the savings book on the fridge like a cat testing a surface. He joked about my old-fashioned ways and said things that sounded caring but left an aftertaste. "Mom, these are outdated," he'd say kindly. "You should let me show you how easy it is now." "But I've managed," I'd answer, soft. "My way has worked." The next scene was at dinner. The children were noisy, the house smelled like tomato and frying oil. Ricardo talked about opportunities, while Diana looked at her plate and the kids chased each other around the chairs. He mentioned a friend who does investments, and how quickly money could grow if only you acted fast. The words were casual, rehearsed. "Mom, imagine doubling this in a year," he said, tapping his glass. "I imagine peace," I replied, and tried to make it sound like a joke. It wasn't. The neighbor's whisper. The secretary's curious glance when I dropped by his office to ask about a receipt. The postal delivery man who lingered with a small package for a few too many minutes. Each of these scenes was small enough to be dismissed. But together they were loud. Silence had been my refuge for years. I kept things calm, even when small things worried me. That night, I sat with the radio low and the kitchen light on, the savings notebook heavy on my lap. I ran my finger along the handwritten columns as if the ink could reassure me. I could not sleep. A call came the next day, an automated message about a transfer. My stomach tightened like a fist. Probably a bank error, I told myself, but I dialed the number printed at the bottom anyway. The woman at the other end said the words you fear most, a system notification, and then, softer, "We'll correct it." Her voice was practiced. Mine trembled. I went to bed and woke early. The city was a distant hum beyond the window. I pulled the curtains aside and noticed that the porch light was on when I always turned it off. A door ajar. An image landed in my chest like a pebble. A door ajar. It was not much. But a door ajar is a small betrayal of the order you keep. It is an invitation left open. I told myself not to be dramatic. I told myself not to accuse. He was my son. He had the right to visit. I had raised him. Memories softened the edges of suspicion. I wanted to be generous. But trust can be used. A second micro scene. At the bank, a clerk asked if I wanted to update my details. Ricardo had suggested it once more at dinner. He had said some forms needed signatures. He had asked me to sign blank documents to save time while we waited for an appointment. I remember the ink on the paper. I remember thinking it was normal. I signed. Later, at home, I found forms in a drawer I had not seen before. They had shapes and words I did not understand. The more I looked, the more a small panic rose like heat from pavement. Another scene. Mariana called from abroad, sharp and practical. "Mom, can you send me a photo of the ledger? I'll be home soon and I want to help reorganize things." Her voice was straightforward, always has been, and I felt a tremor of relief. A child with distance and clarity can see things close to the ground that you miss. When I told her that the savings book was small and private, Ricardo's smile tightened. I felt it, like a wire pulled under a rug. "Don't worry, Mom," he said lightly. "Modern life is different. Trust me." There was a micro-conflict at lunch with a cousin who chuckled at the idea of men being clever when they need something. He shrugged as if to say life is practical and cunning. His eyes lingered on Ricardo. A neighbor commented about how families are these days. Each comment was a small stone in my shoe. Kayla, but not forgotten. That week the messages increased, notifications of logins, of changes. A login from a device named something I didn't recognize. An email confirmation for a transfer I had not approved. I called the bank again. A polite voice promised to investigate. I left with a slip of paper and a stomach like an empty room. I started to pay attention to small details. A car parked that did not belong to anyone on the street, a name on a delivery slip I didn't know, the smell of a cologne that was not mine lingering in the air. All were tiny intrusions, ordinary enough to pass, precise enough to be deliberate. The tension pushed me into a different state. I was no longer content to explain things away. The doubt grew into a thread that would not be tucked back into place. I say this plainly because the change matters. Suspicion matured into a need to know. I could no longer drift on the comfortable assumption that kindness wore the face of my son. The ledger on my fridge felt suddenly exposed, like an open wound. There were 2 more micro scenes before the truth would make itself obvious. The first was a small argument with Diana in the hallway. She brushed past me, restless, and I asked if everything was all right. She said my name quickly and then looked away. "It's a lot, Cristina," she murmured. "The house. The renovations. You're all right?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. Her hands twisted a napkin. I watched her go, and the ache in my chest was not only for money. It was for the way people made choices behind closed doors and assumed others would carry the consequences. I stayed silent, but not forgotten. The last micro scene was the one that finally pierced the fog. I received a notification, simple, white text on my screen about a transfer that had gone through. There was a number. I felt the world tilt. My mouth tasted metallic. I called the bank staff from the little phone corner. The woman said, "It looks like a system error," with a professional calm I found both soothing and false. Outside, a bus rattled past and made the windows shiver. Inside, my hands shook. I left the house with the enforced, slow movements of someone not yet believing the moment they are walking into. I had to see. I had to see with my own eyes. I walked to the bank. The bank smelled of paper and air conditioning. The light over the counter was precise and indifferent. I sat in the waiting area like someone about to be examined, palms folded. The room slid into a kind of slow motion where the hum of the air vents sounded like the sea. I had spent decades shaping a future measured in coins. Each coin had a purpose. Now the purpose had been taken and spread elsewhere. I tried to form a sentence that would make this smaller, that would soften the edges. Nothing did. I left the bank like a person who had learned that a foundation was missing from the house under her feet. The city outside carried on, unaware of the tiny earthquake in my chest. My feet found their way to the building where Ricardo had his office as if guided by a current. I entered the office like a woman who had seen someone else living inside her life. His secretary tried to stop me. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked in a voice trained for polite deflection. "No," I said. "I need to speak with him." He was at his desk, as if nothing had shifted. He looked up and the ease in his face flickered. He had learned to make charm into a mask. For a second it slipped. "Mama," he said, and his tone was a practiced mix of surprise and concern. I put the bank papers down on his desk. The sound they made was decisive. 2 million, Ricardo," I said. "All of it." I watched the color drain from his face. He tried the first defense of those who are used to improvisation, confusion. "Mom, what is this?" "I can explain." His mouth made the shapes of explanations: investments, loans, temporary moves. The words piled like scaffolding and did not hold. "There are authorizations," I said. "You used the forms. You signed. These transfers went to you and to a company I don't know. You emptied the accounts I worked for my whole life." He swallowed. For a moment he tried to turn the narrative. "You signed, Mom. I was helping. You know nothing about digital banking. Herd is not always noisy. It is sometimes a small, dense weight." I felt like glass in my hands. I thought of the nights I had worked, the time I had given up so that his life would be easier. I thought of the little thing I had bought him once with the money I set aside from a double shift, a toy that had cost me 2 nights of walking home alone. I thought of every quiet sacrifice. "I will not let you make my life into your bank account," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. He attempted to smile. It did not reach his eyes. He stumbled over words. He spoke of pressure, of debt, of responsibility. "I thought I would fix it," he said, as though the act of planning to fix something could justify what he had done. The secretary's phone buzzed. It was a small domestic sound and it felt enormous then. Diana arrived later that afternoon, eyes down. She had not known, she said at first, then later that she had suspected but had not dared to ask. The family, which had been a soft place to land, had become a room with a glass wall. I did not burst into accusations and accusations alone. I showed them the evidence. I let the papers speak. The air in the room changed from polite to raw. There were attempts at blame, attempts at explanation, even pleas. "Mom, it's temporary," Ricardo said, a tremor in his voice betraying something like shame. "I will return it." "How?" I asked. "What guarantee do I have?" He looked at me with the old familiarity of boyhood, as if the tether would pull him back. "I will sell things. I will do whatever it takes. You must understand," the betrayal felt like a current that had cut through the storyline of my life. It was not just money. It was the use of my trust as if it were a resource he had a right to draw from. A child of mine, whom I had taught ethics and dignity, had used the lessons I gave him as a ladder to take from me. I walked home with my hands empty of solutions. The house felt altered in a way a window left open does, drafty, revealing. That night I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea I did not drink. I looked at old photographs on the wall. There was Ricardo at 8 years old, grinning with a toy I could remember paying for with a secret coin I had hidden away. There was his graduation, bright and proud. Each photograph felt like an accusation and a question. The excuses ricocheted in my head: loans, investments, pressure to appear a certain way, but the facts did not change. The money was gone. The pages with signatures were in my hand. The voice at the bank had given me the cold documentation that transformed suspicion into a crime. I sat in the dim light and thought of what I could do. I thought of calling someone who knew the law. I thought of talking to Helena. I thought of asking my daughter Mariana to come home. Most of all, I thought of not allowing this to stand. That night I could not sleep. I remember the kitchen light buzzing above me like an insect. The tea grew cold, untouched. I replayed the bank papers in my head until each line burned like a brand. The photographs on the wall looked like relics of a life that had been reinterpreted. I let myself fall into memory because memory is a careful teacher. I remembered the early years, the nights with exams to pass, the hands sewing badges into shirts, the coins tucked into envelopes labeled tuition, the years I said no to myself so my children could say yes. The memories were not dramatic. They were small acts of endurance stitched into a life. I lay awake and counted how many times I had swallowed an ache to keep the peace. I counted the times I had said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. That tally did not make me bitter. It made me resolute. I thought of the word vulnerable and how it had landed earlier like an accusation. It hurt, but it was true in the legal sense. Older people with a lifetime of trust are often targets for those who know how to exploit tenderness. I hated the word for its pity, but I could not deny the reality. He had known which button to press. But pain also brings clarity. The grief of having nearly everything taken away by my own son sharpened into a plan. Decisions do not have to be theatrical to be effective. They need only be methodical. I pulled out the savings notebook from the fridge and laid it on the table. The ink of my life arranged itself clearly in columns. I traced the entries: years of increments, a yellowing record of nights worked double shifts, of lunches skipped. Each line was a witness. Then I did something I had never done before. I wrote not numbers but questions under the last month's entries. Who had access? When did the transfer start? Which forms had I signed and why? Were there digital confirmations? Which account names repeated? I wrote slow, because slow is how careful victories begin. I replayed certain conversations in my mind, listening for the things that had been said and the things tucked behind them. Ricardo's voice, always persuasive, had a softness that had been practiced to disarm. How often had I let softness close my questions? There were other recollections that hurt more sharply. Times when I had set aside money to send for a need and was thanked with a small, dismissive comment the next day. Moments when my opinion was brushed off as old-fashioned. Those small dismissals had paved the way for a bigger one. The first marks of action were practical. I changed my passwords that evening, on a shaky phone, because digital security was the modern version of a locked drawer. I called the bank and asked, firmly this time, that no transaction be allowed without my physical presence. They issued a note on my account. It felt small, but it was a line drawn. I called Helena. Her voice was immediate, steady, the kind that does not blink at scandal. "This is fraud," she said, simply. "We need documentation and counsel. We must assume the worst." I hired a lawyer. The licenciado Mendoza listened and then answered with the professional directness I needed. "We can file civil claims to recover assets and criminal complaints for fraud. We can also request provisional measures to freeze accounts. Hearing legal steps named out loud made the problem concrete. The idea of action steadied my hands. For the first time, I wrote a list of what I would present: account statements, copies of forms signed, the investigator's findings, a notarized letter revoking any power of attorney that might be claimed. There were internal transformations too. I stopped going to bed with the reflex of smoothing things over. I practiced saying no quietly and firmly. I changed the way I answered the phone, moving from softness to precision. It was small, but the posture mattered. One night, alone in the dim kitchen, I asked myself a question I had not allowed before: was I going after punishment or restitution? The answer shifted the tone of my plan. I wanted restoration where possible. I wanted boundaries enforced. I wanted to recreate a space where my tomorrow belonged to me. I wanted Ricardo to understand that trust had limits. I thought about the tangible consequences I wanted: the money returned or accounted for, concrete payment plans if necessary, and legal recognition of wrongdoing so that it could not be repeated. Emotionally, I wanted an honest conversation, a recognition that the harm had not been small. I made practical decisions: change banks, set up an independent advisor, create an emergency account accessible only to someone I trusted, Mariana. I wrote a letter, not yet sent, outlining what I had found and the steps I would take if restitution was not forthcoming. The act of writing turned fury into a plan. There was also a quieter list: what I would not accept. No more clandestine visits. No more forms signed without full explanation. No assumptions that my silence was consent. No idea that my past sacrifice bound me to an exploitative future. I remember the precise moment the decision hardened. It was not a dramatic lightning strike. It was a small, private recognition while I was folding a shirt in the dim light. I felt the old resolve, a memory of the nights I had held 2 jobs and still found a way to tuck a coin into an envelope for school fees. That same grit, older and firmer, set my jaw. This was not a revenge. It was a defense. I will not be used, I murmured to myself. I slept differently after that, not peaceful but not frantic. Sleep returned in fragments. The next day I called the lawyer. We scheduled steps. We asked the bank to freeze certain transactions. We prepared letters. We mapped the route of the stolen funds. I also practiced the words I would say to him. I wrote them down in the margin of the notebook: you have to return what you took. You have to face what you did. I will help you, but not at the expense of what is mine. It was a sentence both simple and ironclad. Saying it out loud felt like closing a door with certainty. The process of putting the plan into motion brought a strange steadiness. I could still feel the ache, a kind of living bereavement, but I had shifted from being acted upon to acting. From hurt to agency. There are practical things you will want to know, and I will not hide them. An investigator's report helped show where money went. A lawyer's letter made the bank take action. Revoking any powers cleared space for formal steps. I learned to ask for documentation and to insist on seeing it. I learned that institutions respond to a clear paper trail. There is also something less tangible: the reclaiming of a voice. When the world had been reduced to numbers on a screen, I had been the human behind those numbers. Reclaiming what was mine required me to insist on being seen. By the time I had gathered what I needed, pages, copies, proofs, I felt prepared. Not triumphant. Prepared. I closed the savings notebook and put it in my bag. I folded the printed investigator report into the folder. I called Mariana and told her quietly, Sunday, for lunch. Please be here early. I would do it in my house, at my table, with witnesses and papers and a steady heart. I was ready. I would not be quiet anymore. I started by doing the small, boring things that feel like armor. My hands shook as I photocopied pages at the library down the street, the fluorescent light humming over me. Each copy went into a manila folder, bank statements, stamped receipts, the photos of the blank forms with my signature, the emails I had printed. I felt both fragile and fierce with each sheet I slid into place. I took pictures of everything with my cheap phone. I photographed the timestamps, the names on the accounts, the authorization codes. I sent a copy to Helena and saved another to a USB I kept in my purse. If anyone tried to erase a thing, I would still have proof in my hands. I called Lick Mendoza again and listened to him outline steps like a calm surgeon. Freeze accounts, request provisional measures, asset tracing, he said, and the words were tools. We asked the bank for a provisional hold. We requested copies of signature authorizations and CCTV logs from the branch. I learned to speak like paperwork, precise, slow, impossible to confuse. At night I changed passwords. I logged out of every app one had ever opened and set new pins that made sense only to me. A small thing, a change of code, felt like a slammed door in a long, wide hallway. I hired the private investigator, the man Helena recommended because his report spoke of money, but also of patterns. He came to my kitchen and we drank coffee while he described what he had found. There are 2 mortgages on Ricardo's home, he said softly. A leased luxury car parked in a garage off Colonia Roma. Regular payments to an entity registered under a different name. Credit cards maxed out. The list landed like broken glass. I remember how the sunlight on the kitchen table looked that day, harsh and honest. I set the investigator's printout beside my savings notebook and ran my thumb along the margin where I had written dates and questions. I had the feeling of a surgeon tracing a wound to know how deep the incision went. I told Mariana everything in a phone call that sounded like wind in my ears. She did not speak much. She arranged a flight back. Her voice on the other end was steady in a way mine wasn't yet. I'll be there, Mama. We'll do this right, she said. Her arrival made the plan real. I also did things that felt smaller but were practical. I closed accounts that had third-party access. I asked the bank to require my presence for any withdrawal over a small amount. I had a letter notarized revoking any supposed powers that Ricardo might claim. Each signature I collected was a small lock on something that had been left open. There were micro-conflicts along the way, the neighbor in the stairwell who said with a sympathetic tilt, I always wondered how he could afford so much, and then the secretary at Ricardo's office who looked at me with a mixture of fear and calculation when I called to ask for some documents. People whispered. People watched. The house felt crowded with eyes. Kalei, mas neo skc, I found myself thinking in my head, the phrase like a hammer tapping a rhythm under everything. I had been silent for a long time, but silence had not been acceptance. It had been a gathering of strength. I prepared the folder that would be my voice. It contained the investigator's report, bank statements, copies of the signed blank forms, screenshots, an official letter from the lawyer, and a notarized notice revoking any authority. I placed a printed demand for restitution on top, simple and clear, return or account for every peso within 30 days, or we file the complaints. I practiced the words I would say, not in a shout but in economy and steel. I want the money returned. I will help you, but not at the cost of my dignity. I wrote it on a scrap of paper and kept it folded in my pocket until the day. At times I felt guilty for preparing like this. A mother who readied herself like a litigant felt almost like a betrayal of the idea of unconditional love. But then I would remember nights alone with an empty plate and say, aloud, I protected you then. I will protect myself now. Helena called and arranged for a witness to be at the house during the meeting. and Mendoza filed preliminary notices at the bank so that transactions would be watched. Everything I could do to keep the proof intact, I did. On Saturday evening I cooked chilaquiles and set the table as if for a usual Sunday. The smell of fried tortilla and salsa. I let the small, ordinary things happen because I wanted them to feel the contrast, life as it should be, and then the truth. When the kids went to the living room for cartoons, I poured coffee and sat down at the head of the table. Ricardo's face was open for a moment, then it closed like a book when he saw the manila folder. I set it down slowly. The sound of paper on wood was deliberate. "This is what is happening," I said. My voice did not tremble. My eyes met his and did not look away. I opened the folder and let the papers do the work. Statements, stamps, the investigators' photos of the Audi in that rented garage, transaction logs, those blank forms signed by me months earlier. Each sheet was a sentence. Ricardo swallowed and reached for words. "There are investments, Mama." I thought, his voice unraveled into excuses shaped like planning. "There are authorizations," I said, and pointed to the signed forms. "You used the documents. You transferred 3.2 million pesos. This is my life." My hands were steady on the table. My knuckles were pale. Diana looked from the papers to Ricardo as if the air itself had become thin. "Ricardo, what is this?" she asked, quiet and sharp. The color drained from her face. For the first time, the fantasy he had sold her fractured in real time. Mariana slid a copy of the investigator's report across the table. "This man found the car. He found payments to a company we never heard of. You have 1 month to make this right." Her voice was steel-wrapped in worry. She had been the one who womped the files into neat stacks with the tenderness of someone who knows she might have to fight. Ricardo's expression moved through panic, then anger, then a plea that sounded like damage control. "You're going to ruin us. You don't understand how hard I tried. I'm your son." He raised his hands as if to catch a falling reputation. I felt a surge of all the small sacrifices lift into a single, vast memory, nights working double shifts, stitches laundered in the dawn, the toy bought with secret coins. "Because I'm your mother," I said, "I expected honesty. I expected respect. Not theft." The words landed not as accusation only, but as judgment tempered by hurt. Diana stood up suddenly. Her chair scraped. The kids clustered at her skirt. "I'm taking the children," she said, and in her eyes was a storm. She moved with the decisive, protective pace of someone who will not stand in a house that smells like betrayal. Ricardo begged, faltered, tried to rewrite reality. Mariana did not allow him to confuse the timeline. "You had access, you signed the forms, and then you moved the money. We have everything documented. This is not a conversation to be continued in whispers." She folded her arms like a judge and did not smile. Neighbors eventually heard some raised voices. Someone across the hall knocked and then drew back when they heard my voice steady. Rumor began, as it always does, to warm its hands on someone else's sorrow. I saw it on faces that peered in windows as the family left, as the car doors shut, as the children climbed into Diana's small hatchback with their knapsacks flung carelessly over seats. Mariana walked Ricardo to the door and left the manila folder on the hall table clearly visible. It was a statement and a signal. The house belonged to me, but the truth belonged to everyone in that hallway now. As they left, Ricardo turned. "Mom," he whispered, a mixture of plea and calculation. I was quiet for a long second. 1 month, I said. 30 days to show restitution or we proceed with legal steps. My words were not punishment so much as a boundary. I had a list of what I would accept, documented returns, payment plans, the bank notices served, the legal filing started. I had made it simple because simple leaves less room for lies. They drove away under the summer light. I closed the door and sat down. For a moment the house felt both empty and full of consequence. That night I went over the checklist with Mendoza on the phone: bank freezes confirmed, complaints prepared, the notarized revocation filed. He told me what would happen next. He spoke in the language of institutions and time. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it came thin and laced with a strange relief. The truth had been said. The family balance had shifted. Now the work of follow-through began. I had drawn a line and placed a clock beside it. I would wait 30 days. And I would not be silent again. 30 days was a long knife. 3 months later the house had settled into a new rhythm. It was quieter in a different way, not the hush of denial, but the calm of boundaries observed. Ricardo returned most of the money. It was not a clean recovery. He sold the car, pawned valuables, negotiated a loan. It cost him pride and comfort. It cost him the illusion he had been buying. He came to my door with folded hands and a face that had grown thinner. He apologized in sentences that sometimes sounded like a rehearsal. Diana nearly left him. They went to therapy, the kind that naming hurts can sometimes make tolerable. I do not know how their story will end. I only know that she came back to our table a few times after, timid and watchful, bringing her own apologies to the space between us. We changed banks. I opened a small emergency fund to which only Mariana has the key. It felt prudent and also like reclaiming a small altar. Better safe, Mariana said, and I agreed. I set an advisor to review statements with me. I learned the names of clauses I had never had to know before. Mariana moved back to Mexico, not because I had demanded it, but because something in this crisis made her want to fold her life around ours. She set up her room with a neat stack of files and a mug that read, Plan A and Plan B, we eat together more often. We talk about trivial things, soap operas and price of avocados as a way to anchor ourselves. Neighbors look at me differently now. Some with curiosity, some with a hint of admiration, and a few with the same old gossiping edge. I have learned to accept that other people's mouths will always have noise. I have learned to keep the important things quiet and locked in folders. Repair is slow and not entirely smooth. Ricardo and I still speak, but the way we do is new. There is accountability now where there had been entitlement. I do not pretend the wound is healed. Some mornings I find a photograph and feel a small grief that does not announce itself loudly, a grief that is patient and private. I continue to cook chilaquiles on Sundays. The ritual comforts me. It is an anchor. Sometimes Ricardo and his family come for them. Sometimes they stay away. Both are acceptable. I made the rules. I had to. I learned things that are practical and things that are harder to teach. I learned that age is not a permission slip for being taken. It is a reason to plan and protect. I learned that love can include limits, that holding someone accountable does not mean I stopped loving him. It means I loved myself enough to insist on respect. At night I still open my savings notebook. I trace the ink that survived. I run my finger along the columns and remember why I saved each peso: school fees, rent, a roof. The notebook is no longer only numbers. It is proof, memory, and a ledger of lessons learned. To you, listening now, maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you have been used because you were tender, or because you trusted, or because you loved out of habit. You can protect what is yours without stopping your heart. You can set boundaries and continue to love in ways that are thoughtful, not self-erasing. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with a family member? Tell me where you're from in the comments, your city, your country. If this story touched you, subscribe and share. There are more voices that need to be heard. Would you defend your dignity if it meant confronting the person you love most?